Young triplet sisters vanished without a trace in 2005, a decade later. What workers found sealed in an old water tank shattered a family forever. They were the heart of every family photo. 3 beams of identical Joeva, Lily and Nora Carter. Born just minutes apart, raised as one breath, and lost in the blink of an afternoon. The summer of 2005 in Acaca County, Texas, was unusually dry. The kind that cracked the earth and made the air feel like a held breath. On the second weekend of August, the Carter family gathered at Grandma Joe's ranch, as they had for every reunion since 1976. It was a modest house surrounded by open fields, fading barns, and the eerie bones of a once active meatpacking plant next door. The plant had been shut down for over 2 decades, rusting behind a bent fence and half-collapsed signs. Most had forgotten about it. The triplets hadn't. Ava was the leader, Lily the sensitive observer, and Nora the firecracker. 7 years old, inseparable, with matching juice-stained t-shirts and the same shoelaces they tied for each other that day. They'd been playing tag, shrieking in the yellow light, while the adults grilled sausages and shared beers under the awning. No one remembers the exact moment they disappeared. One moment, Ava was sitting on the porch railing. Lily had her arm around Grandma Joe's terrier, and Nora was trying to sneak another popsicle. Then, nothing, as if the heat had folded over them and swallowed them whole. By late afternoon, the sun dipped and the laughter began to fade. Their absence hit like a shiver. First, a call across the yard, then rising panic, then screams. They searched every inch, the woods, the drainage ditches, the surrounding fields. Dozens of neighbors joined. Police arrived. Helicopters scanned the area well into the night, and bloodhounds were brought from San Antonio. The fence around the old meatpacking facility had been pried open in spots, likely by bored teens over the years, but the girls weren't found there either. A shallow pond was drained. Wells were sealed. The case quickly escalated to a statewide search. In the media, the triplets were quickly nicknamed the Carter Angels. Their school photos, 3 variations of the same freckled face, were broadcast. Nationally, candlelight vigils sprang up. Truckers taped flyers to their dashboards. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, not a single trace emerged. There was no ransom note, no signs of struggle, no witnesses, just silence. Detective Marvin was assigned to the case in the first 48 hours and carried it longer than most would consider healthy. A father of 2 daughters himself, he often drove the 60 miles from San Antonio to the Carter property even after the official search was called off. It haunted him not just the case, but the feeling, the invisible thread between presence and absence. He had theories, many, but none. Stuck. Abduction was the likeliest. But by whom? A stranger would have needed opportunity, motive, and extreme luck to take all 3 girls in broad daylight without a single scream. Someone familiar, perhaps, but the Carter family was combed thoroughly. Alibis stood, timelines matched, in his notebook. Bell circled one particular structure over and over, the old industrial water tank behind the slaughterhouse. It was massive, nearly 12 feet wide, 10 feet deep, sealed by rusted bolts, its hatch half buried under stacked debris and collapsed siding. At the time, it seemed unlikely. Police knocked on it to check for an echo. Nothing came back. Nothing was opened, he noted. Anyway, then let it go. Years passed. The Carter family fractured under the weight of grief. The girl's mother, Denise, moved to Austin and started over. Their father, Rick, remained on the ranch, becoming a recluse. Grandma Joe passed away in 2009. A heart attack, they said, though. Those closest whispered it was sorrow that killed her. By 2015, the property had changed hands. The family sold off parcels of land, and the meat facility, now rotting and half swallowed by vines, was marked for demolition. A commercial developer had plans to turn it into a trucking depot, and that's when everything cracked open. It was late March. A local contractor named Joel Martinez led the small demo crew. His team had begun clearing metal, preparing to flatten the concrete floors and tear out buried tanks. While moving a pile of twisted scaffolding with a small crane, they heard a metallic groan beneath the surface. It wasn't unusual until the ground shifted and revealed the lid of a tank that had been completely sealed, its edges soldered with a paste of rust, cement, and neglect. Joel, curious more than anything, called over to men and began to break. The seal, it took them nearly an hour, grinding and prying. When the hatch finally opened, a rancid draft escaped, earthy, metallic, and sharp, like wet iron and rot. What they saw inside stopped them cold. Half submerged in foul water were what looked like strands of faded fabric, a tiny yellow jacket, a sleeve of pink cotton, something blue clinging to corroded piping. They drained the tank. It took 2 days. What emerged on the final pass made the headlines once again: 3 small skeletons, perfectly aligned on the tank's rusted floor. One had a cracked rib, another had a charm bracelet still clinging to bone. It was the same bracelet seen in the last photograph taken of her hours before she vanished. The case exploded. Old wounds were torn open. The Carter triplets were back in the news, but this time there was no hope, only horror. The remains were confirmed by DNA within a week. A quiet memorial was held on the ranch, attended by dozens, including no retired. Detective Bell, who hadn't stopped carrying their file, and that's when the real investigation began again, because now they had a crime scene. That tank sealed, hidden, forgotten, hadn't been checked the first time. That was about to haunt them all. The crime scene tape went up faster than the sun the morning after the discovery. News vans lined the rural road outside the old Carter property, where the abandoned factory now looked like something sacred and cursed all at once. What had once been forgotten scrap metal was now a graveyard. Sealed secret, a confession no one had ever spoken aloud. Detective Marvin Bell, though long retired, had returned the moment he heard the news. He stood near the open tank, his lips pressed into a thin line, the same notebook from 2005 still in his pocket. He had written that tank down, circled it twice, underlined it once. I hadn't opened it. Now he couldn't stop seeing the bracelet in his mind, the tiny silver charm shaped like a butterfly. Dulled by rust, but unmistakable. Ava's, still clinging to her. The remains were gently extracted by forensic anthropologists, each set carefully. Preserved. There were no signs of bullet wounds, no stab marks, but trauma was evident. 2 of the skulls had fractures. All 3 skeletons had indicators of constrained positioning. Wrists turned unnaturally inward. Rib cages compressed as if they had been confined in a tight space for too long. This wasn't accidental. No. This was intentional, and it had gone. Unnoticed for a decade, the reopened investigation was led by a younger team from the Texas Rangers Cold Case Unit. But they invited Bell to consult. He walked the grounds again, slower now, each step heavier than the last. He kept returning to one question. Who had access to that tank? In 2005, a list of former employees from the meat facility was pulled. Most had scattered. Some had died. A few still lived in the area. One name kept coming up: Kevin Draper, a former maintenance worker. Fired in 2004 for inappropriate behavior, though details were vague in his file. At the time, it was dismissed quietly and without formal charge. Just a note from the plant manager that he had made several families uncomfortable during company events. He'd been found loitering too often near the daycare facility during company picnics. Nothing provable, nothing punishable, just unsettling. Kevin had lived less than half a mile down the road in a trailer home hidden by oak trees. Records showed he died in 2011. Car accident, single vehicle, heavy rain. His death hadn't raised any eyebrows back then. Now he was the only person tied to the property who had the keys to the tanks. Bell visited Kevin's trailer, now vacant, its roof sagging, weeds overtaking the porch. The current owner, a distant cousin, let them inside. Most of Kevin's belongings had been cleared. But in the dusty crawl space beneath the floorboards, a wooden crate was found. Inside were faded Polaroids, landscapes, rusting machinery, children at play. One photo made everyone go still. 3 girls standing near the fence line, backs turned to the camera, their matching sweatshirts unmistakable pink, yellow, blue. They were looking at the factory. It had been taken from inside the property, likely through a long lens, dated just 3 days before they vanished. They had been watched. A forensic team combed the old factory office, which had been boarded up and overlooked during demolition. Inside was a filing cabinet with water damage. One drawer still opened. Inside were old maintenance logs, inspection reports, and a hand-sketched diagram of the building's plumbing system. The tank where the girls were found wasn't even labeled. It had been decommissioned in 1982 and, according to most diagrams, didn't exist anymore. Only this hand-drawn one showed it, Kevin's initials in the corner. As the investigation deepened, they turned to Kevin's background. He had worked in several factories across the South in the late 80s and 90s, each time for less than 2 years. In 2 towns, there were open missing children's cases during his tenure. No evidence tied him directly. No charges were ever filed, but the pattern was disturbing. They contacted the local police department in Mississippi, where a sick girl vanished in 1998. Her case was nearly identical. Last seen near a factory fence. No sign of struggle, no leads. The factory had since been leveled. No tank was ever found. The girl's body had never been recovered. Could Kevin have been responsible? They would never know for certain. He was dead, but the puzzle pieces began to click into place in horrifying ways. Meanwhile, the Carter family faced the unbearable truth in silence. Rick Carter, the girl's father, had not spoken to the press. He had not attended the memorial. But now he requested to meet Detective Bell. They sat together under the willow tree, behind what was once Grandma Joe's porch. Rick looked decades older than his age, his hands trembling slightly as he passed Bell an envelope. Inside was a drawing, a child's sketch of 3 stick girls holding hands beside what looked like a large metal circle. A tank crudely drawn, but recognizable. Rick said Ava had drawn it 2 weeks before she disappeared. He hadn't thought anything of it. He thought it was a pond, but now he blamed himself for not asking what they were playing near, for not checking the factory grounds himself, for trusting that the search had been thorough. Bell didn't speak. He just nodded. The same guilt lived in his chest. And then came the final blow.
Ow!
Forensic cleanup crews returned to the tank for final documentation and found something else wedged in the drainage pipe. A small locket, art-shaped. Its clasp sealed by time. Inside was a folded piece of paper. It read, "I only meant to keep them for a little while. They weren't supposed to die. No one came to find them. No one heard them." There was no signature, but the writing matched Kevin Draper's known handwriting from employee records. A confession of sorts, not out of remorse, but record. A monster had taken 3 little girls and tucked them into silence. No one had known until now. The summer heat didn't let up. Even in the shade of the old Carter barn, sweat trickled down the backs of the investigators cataloging the evidence, brushing away dust that felt sacred, now sacred, and haunted. The tank had been emptied, the remains taken, the locket sent. 2 forensics. And yet the space it left behind echoed not, just physically, but emotionally. Every creak of rusted pipework sounded like a whisper. Every gust of wind that rattled the fence line felt like a memory shaking loose. Detective Lauren Hale, now officially leading the case, had never worked a case quite like this one. She wasn't even in high school when the triplets vanished. But she remembered the news stories, the flyers, the candlelight vigils, and now she was here, walking the same ground as the girls' final moments. The message found in the locket chilled her more than the remains did. It suggested the girls had lived for a while after they disappeared. Maybe hours, maybe days. They hadn't just vanished. They had waited. Lauren spent long nights rereading the old case files. Kevin Draper's name was everywhere. In maintenance logs, in employee complaints, in the original interviews. But no one had taken him seriously back then, the kind of man. Gave everyone the creeps but didn't technically break the law. The kind of man who slipped through the cracks every time. Had no children, no wife, no family left behind. But he had kept records, not many, and none formal. But in his old trailer, beneath the floorboards of the shed behind it, another box was found. Inside were 3 items: a plastic bracelet identical to the one Ava wore, a set of Polaroids, undeveloped, and a diary. The diary wasn't labeled just a small black book, weather-worn, its spine cracked and flaking. Most of it was filled with ramblings, observations about weather, scribbles of names and numbers that didn't mean anything at first glance. And then, buried in the middle, a series of entries from June 2005. The ink was shaky. Rushed, they came close again to day pink, yellow, and blue.
Ow.
They don't see me behind the tanks, but I see them. They leave their drinks everywhere. Like I won't know where they've been. I cleaned it up, everything. But they got in. I left the hatch unsealed. It was just a game. I thought they'd yell or call for help, but they just went quiet. I checked an hour later. One was breathing. Two weren't. I didn't know what to do. So I left them. And when I came back, it was done. I didn't kill them. Not really. Not with my hands. But I buried them anyway. Lauren's breath caught as she read the last entry aloud to the team. It wasn't a killer's boast. It was a coward's excuse. Not premeditated, but not innocent either. An act of recklessness, then silence, and then nothing for 16 years. Meanwhile, the Carter family faced waves of grief all over again. The triplets' older brother Jacob was 25 now. He had been just 9 when they disappeared. Too young too. Understand it at the time, too old to forget. He'd spent most of his adult life trying not to think about that day. But now he couldn't think about anything else. He visited the water tank once, quietly, without media, just stood beside it, one hand pressed to the rusted edge. And then he started digging, not physically, but online, searching through archives of the factory, of Kevin's past jobs, of missing kids in similar towns. Lauren gave him permission unofficially. Off the record, she said, if you find anything that helps us, we'll follow it. Jacob worked through the nights, and one evening at 2:37 a.m., he emailed her a news clipping from a 1993 local Mississippi newspaper. A girl named Ellie Thomas had vanished near a similar meatpacking facility, a factory Kevin Draper had worked at that same year. The girl was never found. The factory closed down 2 years later. No water tank had ever been searched. Stared at the screen. The photo of little Ellie was blurry, black and white, but she wore a necklace shaped like a butterfly, the same charm Ava's bracelet had. Back in Texas, the forensic lab released a chilling detail from the autopsies. Traces of cleaning solvent were found on the girl's bones, particularly around the joints, not enough to remove all tissue back then, but enough to suggest someone tried to sanitize the area or delay decomposition. Why would Kevin do that? What was he planning? What did he fear? They also noted slight discoloration on the inside of the tank, a ring where water levels had once settled, and another smaller, one near the bottom, as if it had been drained, then refilled, then drained again multiple times. Lauren's mind raced. Had the tank been Kevin's hiding place for other crimes? Was Ava, Lily, and Nora's case the only one, or just the one that got noticed? The media frenzy picked up again when a former co-worker of Kevin's came forward, anonymously, claiming that in 2004, Kevin had once bragged at a bar about how easy it was to keep people quiet if they had nowhere to go. He hadn't been taken seriously. He never was. Lauren and Belle both sat silently when they listened to that recording. Belle finally broke the silence. We had him in front of us, and we let him walk. Lauren said nothing, but her knuckles turned white around her pen. By week's end, Jacob Carter made another discovery, one that shifted everything. In a set of 2005 Google Earth satellite images, a blurry shape near the tank's side looked unusual. He enhanced it, adjusted contrast. It looked like a crate, the same crate where the Polaroids were eventually found. It had been outside the tank once, moved inside later, which meant Kevin had revisited the site after the girls were already gone more than once. Had he been hiding something else? Or worse, someone? A ground-penetrating radar sweep was ordered around the entire perimeter of the facility. Then 48 hours, new signal was detected beneath the old boiler room, a sealed crawl space beneath 6 feet of concrete. No one knew it existed, not on blueprints, not on old records. Just there, waiting. Lauren ordered it opened. The process took a day. The silence afterward lasted longer. Inside, they found blankets, candy wrappers, a broken flashlight, a moldy pillow, and something no one could explain. 3 small name tags, Lily, Nora. He had written their names. He had planned to keep them alive. For how long and for what? The discovery of the crawlspace shifted the narrative. What had initially appeared to be an accidental death, a moment of negligence sealed by fear, now began to take the shape of something far darker. Lauren Hale stood silently at the edge of the dig site, staring down into the hollow space below. Unable to shake the feeling that the girls had been there, alive after they disappeared. Blankets meant sleep. Candy wrappers meant hunger. Name tags meant possession. It wasn't just a hiding spot. It was a holding space, a prison. And the fact that Kevin Draper had written their names legibly, carefully, suggested something personal. The girls weren't strangers to him. He had watched them. He had waited. And then he had acted. The forensic team found no human remains in the crawlspace. No trace of blood, no DNA that could definitively prove the girls had been kept there. But there was one thing that spoke louder than science. A small crayon drawing, tucked under the edge of the mold, showed 3 stick-figure girls standing beneath a crooked sun, each labeled with a single letter, A, L, and N. One figure held a balloon. Another had braids. A third had her arms raised as if waving. There was a 4th figure, drawn taller, holding something long and black in its hand. It had no name, only a frown. Lauren sat with Jacob Carter that evening, her voice low, steady. "We can't prove it was them," she said, "but we know it was." Jacob nodded slowly. His eyes didn't leave the drawing on the table between them. "They were there," he whispered. "He kept them there." Pause, and then he changed his mind. Lauren didn't reply. They didn't know how long the girls had been alive after their disappearance hours, days, weeks. But what they did know, now painfully, was that someone had intended for them to stay in that space for longer. Someone had written their names, made the room child-friendly, left food. It wasn't a panic move. It was a plan. With pressure mounting from the public and a reinvigorated media storm, Lauren reopened old factory logs from 2003 to 2005. She wanted every shipment, every employee. Record every subcontractor ever logged. That's when she noticed something strange. Multiple blank entries in the August 2004 security log.
Out 1 week where footage had been manually overwritten.
A practice typically done during system tests. Except there were no documented tests that week. The overwrite had been done by Kevin Draper. He had admin access. As a lead maintenance worker, he was responsible for keeping systems clean, both physically and digitally. She double-checked the dates. August 2004, 10 months before the girls vanished. What was he hiding that far in advance? In a quiet home 2 counties away, an elderly man named Leonard Pope was watching the news when a familiar name stopped him. Cold Kevin Draper. He sat forward, mute button pressed, the crawl space, the tank, the children's remains. It was all over the television now, and Leonard's hand began to shake. He had been Draper's landlord once, for 2 years. From 2002 to 2004, Draper rented a small farmhouse on his property. Leonard remembered the man's quietness, the odd hours, the padlocks on the shed, even though no one ever went near it. He had just figured the man liked his privacy. But there was one memory that wouldn't leave him. One evening, in early fall of 2004, Leonard had gone to check a leaking pipe near the fence line and heard crying faint. High-pitched, like a child's whimper. He'd gone to investigate, but saw nothing. He even knocked on Draper's door. Draper had answered, shirtless, sweating, holding a wrench. "There's no one here," he said calmly. "Just me and the rats." Leonard had backed away. That memory, long buried, returned now like a freight train. He picked up the phone. Lauren arrived at Leonard's home the next morning with Bell and 2 uniformed officers. Leonard recounted the story in detail, his voice cracking. "I didn't think anything of it back then. I just figured he had the radio on, maybe a stray cat. But now," he looked away, "I think they were already with him. He had them before. The reunion. Maybe not all 3, but at least one, maybe. He planned it long before it happened." Lauren froze. If Leonard was right, if Kevin had abducted one of the triplets before June 2005, it changed everything. The working theory had been that the girls were taken together, that they had been playing near the edge of the farm and vanished at once. But what if Kevin had taken one earlier, groomed the situation, and used the family reunion as a cover to complete what he'd already started, a slow abduction, executed in parts? No one had considered that. Lauren ordered a forensic team, too. Leonard's old property had been rented out several times since Draper's departure, but the shed remained standing, forgotten, weather-beaten, half-sunken weeds. Inside, the air was damp and sour. Cobwebs clung to every corner, but beneath a false floor panel, they found something chilling, a small pink canvas shoe, size child, brand identical to one Nora Carter had worn in photos. It wasn't proof, but it was enough. Kevin had taken at least one of the girls before the reunion, and no one noticed. Jacob stood alone that night, in front of the tank again, now lit by temporary floodlights as investigators continued to photograph and document the area. He was holding the crayon drawing, the one from the crawl space. In the picture, the balloon. String in Ava's hand was curved, not straight, and faintly resembled a hook. Jacob turned the page over. On the back, in light pencil, someone had tried to write a message. It read, "We wait when sun gone." The grammar, the childish phrasing it, wasn't random. It was a message. And Jacob realized with a sudden chill that the tank, sealed from sunlight, had been a place they were placed after sunset, not during daylight. They were alive in the crawl space, then moved. The timeline wasn't what everyone thought. Lauren's final discovery that week came from Kevin Draper's niece, a woman named Rebecca, who had not spoken to him in decades. She found something among his old boxes in her attic, an unlabeled VHS tape. She'd forgotten she even had it. The label read only July. Lauren had the tape digitized and watched it alone, her fingers tight around a notepad. The footage was grainy, dark, silent, but it showed what looked like the inside of a Sheeta table. A child's cup, a girl, back turned to the camera, seated, braids down her back. She was playing with a doll. A door opened, a shadow entered. The footage cut. Lauren stopped breathing. She rewound, played it again and again. She needed to be absolutely sure this wasn't panic. This was preparation Kevin Draper didn't just hide his crime. He rehearsed it. Lauren sat in silence for nearly an hour after the tape ended. Her office lights were off. The screen, frozen on the grainy image of the girl with braids, cast a faint glow across her face. She knew it was one of the Carter triplets, though which one she couldn't yet tell. The doll clutched in the child's hands was missing its head. The silent footage was damning not just because it placed Kevin Draper in the act of surveillance, but because it documented intent. This wasn't a man who acted in panic. This was someone who planned, who rehearsed, who relived it enough to record it for himself. That changed the legal terrain. But more importantly, it changed the emotional one. These girls were watched, they were groomed, they were failed. Lauren picked up the phone and called Jacob. "We need to talk." She said, "There's more." By the next morning, the tape had been reviewed by the entire task force. A timestamp in the corner, barely legible, suggested the video was recorded on July 2nd, 2004, nearly a full year before the girls vanished. Lauren's earlier theory was no longer just theory. Kevin Draper had abducted one of the triplets early. Which one, Ava, Lily, or Nora still, remained unclear. But it was now evident she had either been returned after a period or never noticed missing due to family assumptions. After all, the girls looked nearly identical. If Kevin had lured one away for a few hours and then returned her, or someone else had covered for her absence, it was possible no one realized. Lauren knew she had to revisit the family reunion guest list and go back to the photos. The 2005 reunion had been well documented. Several relatives brought camcorders and disposable cameras. Jacob's Aunt Martha had even created a scrapbook of the event, which she offered willingly when Lauren came knocking. They sat at the dining table, photos spread out between them, paper napkins doubled as protective sleeves. There, Lauren said, pointing. That's the moment. The girls at the cornfield. Can I take this? Martha hesitated, then nodded. Lauren studied it carefully. Ava stood closest to the fence, a small woven bracelet visible on her wrist. Lily was behind her, squinting into the sun. Nora, usually the most outgoing, stood off to the side, smiling but slightly withdrawn. Her arms were crossed. Her hair, usually in 2 perfect braids, was loose and frizzy. Why wasn't she braided? That day? Lauren asked aloud. Martha blinked. I don't know. She always had braids. Lauren's pulse quickened. It wasn't Nora. It was whoever Kevin had placed back into the group. Which meant one of the girls at the reunion wasn't who everyone thought. This realization sent Lauren down a chilling rabbit hole. She cross-referenced every photo compared. Smiles, eyes, minor differences in posture. It was painstaking work, but a pattern slowly emerged. The girl believed to be Nora didn't appear in many group shots that day. When she did, she was often at the edge of the frame, her face partially turned as if someone was trying to avoid having her be seen clearly. Lauren marked the photos with colored sticky notes, red for Lily, blue for Ava, and yellow for the one believed to be Nora. By the end of the process, she had to accept the unthinkable. The girl at the reunion was not Nora, she was someone else, and that opened up a new theory. What if Kevin had abducted Nora in 2004, and the girl at the reunion in her place wasn't a Carter at all? The theory seemed wild, implausible, but there was precedence in certain abduction cases, abductors replacing victims or staging appearances to avoid suspicion. Kevin, after all, had a long window to manipulate the family and the girls. Lauren revisited the videotape one more time. She paused at the moment the girl lifts the doll. There, barely visible, was a faded bruise on her left forearm, a mark that didn't appear on Nora in any reunion photos. Her throat tightened. Kevin hadn't just abducted the girls, he had inserted himself, perhaps even manipulated the timeline of their disappearance to delay suspicion. This wasn't a simple snatching. This was a constructed lie. Meanwhile, Jacob Carter had gone back to the now-declared crime scene. The tank, though drained and stripped, had been left untouched since the last forensic sweep. It stood like a skeletal monument in the center of the overgrown property. Jacob walked its edge slowly. He remembered the day he helped build the fence with his grandfather, the laughter from the girls, especially Ava, who'd been obsessed with the idea of becoming a mermaid and had splashed around in the old horse troughs. The last photo taken of them as a trio was on this lawn. Now it was a crime scene. Jacob placed a single photo down near the tank's base, the one with all 3 girls holding balloons. He whispered, "I'm sorry, I didn't see it." At the precinct, new DNA analysis confirmed a disturbing fact. Trace DNA found on the doll in the VHS video matched Kevin Draper. But another profile had also been discovered. A female, not one of the Carter girls, an unidentified female DNA marker. Lauren felt a chill sweep through her bones. Then there'd been another child, a practice victim, a failed abduction. Or, even more horrifying, had Kevin done this before? They searched Kevin's old apartment records post-2005 and learned that in 2003, while living in Corpus Christi, he'd been briefly investigated after a neighbor reported hearing sobbing sounds from his garage. No charges were filed, no evidence found, but now, with this context, it became more sinister. Lauren contacted the Corpus Christi PD and requested the case file. 2 days later, she received a scanned document, faded and worn. It referenced a missing child from the same building. 6-year-old Valerie Montez, gone without a trace, never found. Lauren looked at the date, October 3rd, 2003. Nearly 2 years before the Carter triplets. Lauren called Jacob again. Her voice shook this time. Kevin might have done this before. A girl named Valerie Montes. Same area, same age range. Jacob closed his eyes. How many more? I don't know. But it was clear the Carter case wasn't isolated. Kevin Draper was a serial predator, and the triplets weren't his first victims. Then came the final blow. The forensics team, still analyzing the crawlspace contents, found something pressed deep behind a wall panel, a child's diary, pages warped by mold, but partially legible. One entry stood out. He says we get out. When the red light turns green, we're trying to be good. Ava cries at night, but I sing for her. I tell her it's almost time, but there's no green yet. The page was signed Lily. Lauren broke down reading it. They had waited. They had hoped. No, they had died before the light ever changed. The discovery of Lily's diary page turned everything inside out, not just for Lauren or for Jacob, but for everyone involved in the case: forensic investigators, detectives, reporters, even volunteers who'd searched for the girls a decade ago. The page was dated July 9th, 2005, 5 days after the girls were officially reported missing. That meant one thing: they were still alive for several days. Not all three necessarily, but at least Lily. And that single revelation changed the timeline in devastating ways. It also shifted the guilt. Jacob sat in the precinct's conference room, his hands trembling as he reread the transcript of the diary entry. Lauren had printed it out for him, unsure if she should deliver it all at once. "There's no green yet," he whispered. He imagined the dim concrete silence of that hidden place beneath the factory. The way the air must have smelled, the way the girls, his sisters, clung to each other in the dark, waiting for a sign, any sign that rescue was coming. And no, one ever came, not because they didn't try, but because no one even knew where to look. Lauren had brought in a behavioral profiler from Houston, someone with experience tracking long-term abduction offenders. His name was Dr. Marcus Odell, an aging, sharp-eyed man who spoke quietly but with urgency. After reading the file and reviewing the evidence, he offered his grim assessment. This man rehearsed. He escalated slowly, probably stalked dozens of children over the years. But what happened with the Carter girls, that was his masterpiece. Not in the sense of achievement, but in the sense of control. It's clear he built a world down there, a place to play God. Jacob flinched at that word. Dr. Odell looked at him carefully. "Did Kevin ever attend church with your family?" Jacob nodded slowly, sometimes not regularly. "Did he ever talk about morality, punishment, judgment?" "Yeah," Jacob said. "I mean, he wasn't preachy, but he'd talk about sin, how the world was corrupt, especially children. Said they were being poisoned by TV and toys. I thought he was just weird." Lauren leaned in. "Do you think he believed he was saving them?" Dr. Odell didn't blink. "Not saving, cleansing." They revisited the tank site that afternoon, this time with a specialized ground-penetrating radar team. Kevin had used the crawl space beneath the factory as a holding space. There was a possibility of hidden extensions, narrow passages, false walls, or even escape shafts. The crew worked slowly, scanning section by section, and then, under the western corner of the old foundation, the machine picked up something unusual. A hollow pocket, roughly 6 feet long, 2 feet wide. They brought in the excavation tools. Hours passed. Jacob waited by the fence, watching dust rise in the wind. He remembered playing tag with the triplets in that same lot, the way Ava used to cheat by hiding behind the water pump, the way Nora always gave herself up laughing. But now, all he could picture was that crawl space, that darkness. Finally, one of the workers shouted, "We found something." Lauren rushed over, gloves already on. The pocket wasn't deep, only about 4 feet underground, but what they pulled out chilled everyone to their core. Was a child's mattress, molded, rotted, but unmistakably shaped. There was a stuffed bear fused to the edge, its fabric bloated with water and decay. And beside it, a ring of rusted spoons, 6. Total, all child-sized. Lauren crouched down. He fed them down here. The media frenzy reignited. It wasn't just a cold case anymore. It was a serial predator case, a decade-long hidden horror story playing out beneath a defunct meatpacking plant. Reporters circled the area like vultures. Helicopters buzzed low over the town. Former employees were interviewed. A woman from 1999 claimed she'd once seen Kevin watching schoolgirls walk past his house with a strange look. Another man remembered helping Kevin dig a trench in the back lot, claiming it was for plumbing repairs. Now it all sounded suspicious, but back then, no one had reason to question him. That was the worst part. Jacob received an anonymous letter in the mail 2 days later. It was a single envelope, no return address. Inside, a Polaroid photograph. At first glance, it looked like a blurry shot of a dirt hallway, concrete walls, shadows. But in the corner, barely visible, was a child's hand pressed against a sheet of metal. On the back, in pencil, "Not all of them died together." Jacob dropped the photo. Lauren took it immediately into evidence. The handwriting didn't match Kevin's. The material of the photo, aged but not old enough to be from 2005, suggested it had been taken within the last 5 years. That meant someone else had access to that. Playsor was still using it. New theories emerged. What if Kevin hadn't acted alone? What if someone else, a friend, a relative, another worker, had continued his pattern, or worse, had helped him orchestrate it from the beginning? Lauren began combing through Kevin's known associates. One name resurfaced repeatedly: Warren. Tiller, a quiet man who'd worked maintenance at the factory until 2002, fired for theft, never married, no children. Last known address was in Nevada, but he hadn't been seen in years. Warren's work logs put him on site during most of the 2001 to 2004 period, and he knew the factory layout better than anyone. If anyone knew about that crawl space, it was him. They issued a search alert nationwide, but Lauren was already preparing for something darker. Warren might be dead, or Warren might be watching. She remembered the tape, the way the camera had been set up, the angles, the patience. That was someone with practice. If Kevin was the performer, Warren was possibly the director. Meanwhile, the water tank was revisited one final time. Forensic divers had finished combing through its base, but decided to use chemical residue testing on the interior lining. Results showed traces of sodium cyanide, a chemical not used in any known part of the factory's cooling systems. Common application in that quantity? Pest extermination or poisoning? Lauren felt sick. That tank hadn't just been where the bodies ended up. It might have been the method of execution. She drove to Jacob's house that night. He was sitting on the porch staring at the stars. "They were murdered," she said. He didn't flinch. "I figured. Not all at once. Some died faster, others later." He nodded slowly. "I keep wondering if they knew, if they saw it coming." Lauren sat beside him. "I think Lily did." Writing it's like she was preparing Ava, protecting her. "Nora too, probably." "That's the part that hurts the most," he whispered. They stayed strong for each other. Lauren didn't speak. There was nothing left to say, just the wind and the ghosts of 3 little girls who once laughed in that yard. Jacob Carter barely slept after that last conversation with Lauren. The image of the rusted mattress, the spoons, the poisoned tank, those weren't just forensic details to him. They were glimpses into the final hours of his sister's lives. 3 little girls who had once braided each other's hair, drawn hopscotch boards in chalk, and laughed until their bellies hurt, now reduced to evidence bags and reports. But something inside Jacob was shifting. He no longer wanted just closure. He wanted the full truth. The next morning, Lauren showed up with new intel. Her face was pale. "Jacob, we found Warren Tiller." Jacob stood still, alive. Yes, and not just alive. Living under a new name in Utah? Real name, buried in a bankruptcy filing from 2006. But facial recognition caught him applying for a fishing license last year. Jacob clenched his jaw. "So what now? We're sending agents." "If he's involved," Jacob interrupted. If Lauren paused, then nodded. "You're right. When we find him, we'll know." 3 days later, in a remote trailer park just outside Cedar City, Utah, federal agents knocked on the door of a rusting camper with boarded windows and a sun-bleached American flag tacked to the side. Warren answered the door in a dusty plaid shirt. He was calm to calm. "I knew you'd come eventually," he said, as if they were old friends. They arrested him without incident. Inside the camper, agents found hundreds of unlabeled VHS tapes stacked in crates. Some were blank, some were home recordings of old cartoons, but several bore the same hand-drawn markings. Numbers followed by dates ranging from 1998 to 2007. One tape, labeled the 10th of July '05 tank, was handed directly to Lauren. She didn't. Watch it alone. That night, in the conference room, she played the tape with Jacob sitting beside her. It was grainy. Static lines danced across the screen. Timestamp blinked in the corner. The footage showed a narrow concrete tunnel, poorly lit. At first, nothing moved. Then the camera panned slowly to a metal grate. Behind it, a child Lily. She was holding a stuffed bear. Her face was pale, but alert. She looked up toward the lens, lips moving slightly. There was no audio. She wasn't crying. She was waiting. Jacob pressed his palm to his mouth. Shoulders trembled. Then, from behind the camera, a voicemail.com, almost rehearsed. Only the quiet ones get the treats. The tape cut to black. The video confirmed what they'd feared. Kevin had not acted alone. Warren had been there too, possibly orchestrating, possibly controlling, and maybe still hiding more than anyone imagined. Under interrogation, Warren was strangely cooperative. "Yes, I knew Kevin," he said. "We worked together. He was impulsive. That's how mistakes happen." Lauren leaned forward. "So, you were the careful one?" He smiled faintly. "Careful. Enough." She asked him about the tank. He didn't deny it. Clever, wasn't it? No one would ever drain an old cooling tank. Who checks what's beneath rusted metal sheets in a condemned building? Lauren didn't speak. She waited. He leaned in slightly. "I gave them choices, you know. I wasn't cruel. I let them pick their meals, read to them. There was structure. Peace." "You're describing imprisonment," Lauren said coldly. "No," Warren replied. "I gave them silence. The world was noise. I showed them stillness." That was the moment Lauren realized something. This man didn't see himself as a killer. He saw himself as a monk. Warren was charged with conspiracy to commit kidnapping, multiple counts of first-degree murder, unlawful imprisonment, and obstruction of justice. But even after the charges, he offered more chilling confessions that walked the line between boasting and fantasy. He claimed there were other tunnels, other projects, but refused to say where. Some things, he said, are better left sealed. Back in southern Texas, the Carter property became a memorial site. People brought flowers, dolls, chalk drawings in the driveway that spelled out Ava, Lily, Nora, never forgotten. But something in Jacob still didn't rest. It wasn't just the horror of what happened. It was the why. Why them? Why that day? So he started digging into records himself. In August 2005, just a month after the girls vanished, Kevin's name appeared on a local contractor list for volunteer aid during a flood cleanup in a nearby town. That alone wasn't suspicious. But during that same window, phone records showed multiple late-night calls to a payphone near the Carter farm. No one had traced them back then, and now it was too late to retrieve audio. But Jacob had a theory. Kevin hadn't picked them at random. He'd been watching them before the reunion. Lauren reviewed school district records. Sure enough, Kevin had briefly worked as a substitute janitor at the girls' elementary school in late 2004, 3 months. Just long enough to learn names, just long enough to blend in. He'd even signed a Christmas card recovered in a file box to Miss Lily from Mr. K. Stay bright. It had been overlooked, just a sweet gesture. Until now, the story spread nationally again. A Netflix documentary crew approached Jacob for permission to document the case. He declined. "This isn't entertainment," he said. "This is my sister's lives." Instead, he focused on the Ava Lily Nora Foundation, his own initiative dedicated to identifying hidden industrial sites where children may have been harmed or buried during the 1980s and 90s. He already had tips pouring in: old canneries, mills, places no one visited anymore, places people had forgotten. In November 2015, just before the first snowfall, Jacob visited the site one last time. The water tank had been dismantled. The crawl space sealed. Land was being sold for development. He stood in the clearing alone. Wind rustled the grass. The air smelled of rust and rain. He took out a small tin box. Inside were 3 identical charm bracelets, replicas of the one Ava wore. He buried the box beneath the old pecan tree where they used to play. And as the wind picked up, he whispered. 3 names like a prayer: Ava, Lily, Nora. Then he walked away. By early 2016, the Ava Lily Nora Foundation had quietly begun making waves. Jacob, once the grieving older brother, desperate for answers, had grown into something else. A soft-spoken but determined advocate who wasn't just seeking justice for his sisters, but for any child lost to the cracks of forgotten places. He hired retired structural engineers. A former cold case analyst volunteered part-time. A small group of ex-journalists began combing through historical maps of derelict sites across Texas and neighboring states. At first, Jacob had thought his sister's case was rare. But what he started finding said otherwise. One email changed everything. A woman named Diana Morrison, 42, quiet, living in Abilene, wrote the foundation with a strange message. When I was 11, my mother worked at the Dorsey Cannery. She died in 1994. I've never told anyone this before. But one night she came home shaken and whispered to me, "If you ever see a man with a shaved head and metal rings on his boots, run the other way." I asked her why. She said some places look abandoned, but they're still used. That phrase stuck with me. God. She said it again just before she died. The phrase struck Jacob like a bell in the dark. Some places look abandoned, but they're still used. It felt like something Warren might have said. Lauren got involved immediately. She remembered Warren's cryptic interviews, hints that there had been other sites, other projects. Could the Dorsey Cannery be one of them? The building still stood, mostly located just an hour from where the Carters had lived. It had closed in 1990 after a refrigeration accident killed 2 workers. The place was sealed, tagged with asbestos warnings, and largely forgotten. But when Jacob and Lauren visited with a permit in hand, they found something odd. In the back of the building, past warped office doors and torn conveyor belts, was a small, rusted staircase that led nowhere, just a door bolted shut with chains. On the wall beside it, faded graffiti in red spray paint read, "Cold Room Number 6." But there were only 5 cold rooms listed on the building plans. This door wasn't on any official layout. Jacob stared at it for a long time, then whispered, "What were they keeping behind here?" A locksmith was brought in. The chains fell away with an eerie clatter. The hinges groaned open. The room beyond was small, barely larger than a shipping container, and pitch black. They used flashlights. What they found chilled everyone. The walls were lined with mattress foam. Crude drawings covered parts of the metal, childlike sketches in crayon, most faded beyond recognition. In the corner sat a cracked plastic lunchbox, half melted by time. Inside, a pair of pink hair clips. Jacob stepped back. Lauren whispered, "We need forensics down here now." The discovery hit the news again. Porter speculated that Warren and Kevin had used the site as a second location, maybe even as a holding cell before transferring the girls to the meat plant, but nothing definitive could be proven. Still, it raised an urgent question. Had there been other children? Jacob feared the answer was yes, and not just in Texas. Meanwhile, the original tank site was reclassified as a crime memorial and protected from redevelopment. A bronze plaque was installed near the base of the old pecan tree, read, "In loving memory of Ava, Lily, and Nora Carter, lost but never forgotten. May we always search for those who can no longer speak." Jacob was there the day it was unveiled. Dozens of people came. Some brought children. Others brought photos of missing relatives. Lauren stood off to the side, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding her eyes. A woman next to her leaned in and whispered, "Did they ever find out who helped him?" Lauren said nothing, because the truth was, they still hadn't. 1 week later, a tip came in that shifted everything. A man named Dennis Holt, a former auto mechanic who once worked with Kevin, had passed away. While cleaning out his home, his niece found a storage key hidden in a rusted paint can. The storage unit was just outside Waco. Inside were old car parts, and buried beneath boxes of rubber hoses, a small wooden crate. It contained cassette tapes, dozens labeled by date. Some had Kevin's name scribbled on the corner, and 2 tapes were marked, Carter, July 2nd, 2005. Lauren felt her stomach twist when she saw the handwriting. They brought in specialists to convert the audio. What they heard changed. Investigation again. The first tape began with faint static, then voices. Kevin's voice. "I told you they wouldn't notice until dark." Another voice, unmistakably Warren's. "You shouldn't have taken all 3. We planned for 2. Kevin laughed. The third one followed. "I wasn't going to shove her off." "Warren, that changes things. We don't have enough space." Kevin. "So, we'll adjust. I'll set up the tank. Figure out the rest." The tape went silent. Lauren's hands trembled. The second tape was worse. Screams, muffled pleading, and then Warren's voice. Sharp, quiet, no more names, not even among yourselves. It was proof. Warren wasn't just an accessory. He was a monster too. Jacob didn't listen. To the full tapes, he couldn't. But he heard enough, and it left him hollow. They'd spent years thinking Warren might have been a handler, a fixer, someone who helped cover Kevin's crimes. But the truth was, he was the architect, the man who drew the map. Kevin was violent, impulsive. Warren was deliberate, cold. Warren built the tank's false floor. He'd chosen the spot. He'd recorded them, watched them. And when they died, he'd written it all down. Not with remorse, but with method. Back in Utah, Warren was reinterrogated. This time, Lauren didn't hide her disgust. "You lied," she said. "You said you weren't there when they died." Warren looked up from his tray of food. "I didn't say that." She stared. "You implied it?" He wiped his mouth slowly with a napkin. "I imply a lot of things." Then he smiled. "Act!" Lauren left the room shaking. He wanted her to know. He wanted them all to remember him. Warren Harav had always been a shadow in the background, mild-mannered maintenance supervisor. No criminal record, clean work history, albeit with gaps. Most people remembered him as quiet, respectful, a bit off, one former coworker said, but never threatening. But now, with Kevin's tapes exposing him as a co-conspirator, investigators reopened every chapter of Warren's past. They mapped every factory where he'd worked, every town he'd moved through, every disappearance in the area, and one place kept surfacing. Redgate County, a flat. Scrubby strip of land 3 hours from the Carter property. Between 1997 and 2008, 3 children had vanished within 10 miles of Redgate, all girls. It's all under age 10, all in summer. None were ever found. And the chilling detail. Warren had worked there in 2003, just a year before he moved closer to the Carter farm. Jacob stared at the board. "He didn't just help Kevin," he said. "This is what he did," Lauren agreed. But she thought there was still something missing, a final thread, and it came from a place no one expected, a closed juvenile facility Warren once helped renovate as a contract worker in 1998. The Redgate Juvenile Center had been built in the 1960s, shut down in the late 1980s, and then reopened briefly as a state-run rehabilitation center in the late 90s before being abandoned for good. Warren had worked there for 5 months, repairing HVAC systems and wiring. When Lauren and Jacob visited, the building was in ruins, roof collapsed, walls scorched from a small fire years back. But what stood out wasn't inside the building. It was outside, behind the cafeteria's loading dock. A small stone hatch, low to the ground, partially buried. The facility blueprints didn't show any basement beneath that wing, yet here it was, a sealed entryway made of rusted iron. Lauren crouched. "Get someone to dig this up now." Took 2 days to excavate. When the hatch was finally pried open, a stairwell descended into darkness. The air that escaped was thick with mold, rot, and something else, something older. They descended slowly, flashlights slicing through the murk. At the bottom, a narrow hallway, 10 feet long, metal, walls lined with hooks. Then a chamber octagonal, maybe 15 feet across, completely windowless. In the center, a metal cot, chains bolted to either side, and carved into the wall in rough scratches, a single word: July. Lauren froze. Jacob whispered, "That's..." The month they vanished, there was more. In the far corner, a pile of burned paper, mostly ash. But one page had survived the heat, a ledger dated July 2nd, 2005, and at the bottom, 3 check marks. Beside them, A.L., Ava, Lily, Nora. It was the final confirmation. Warren hadn't just helped Kevin dispose of the girls. He'd prepared for them. The water tank wasn't improvised, it was planned. The ledger detailed maintenance logs for chemical seals, water temperatures, and metal corrosion rates. It referenced structural reports from the meat plant files Warren should never have had. He'd scouted, studied, and designed their deaths not in rage, not in fear, but in cold, deliberate ritual. Warren hadn't been Kevin's assistant, he'd been the mastermind. When confronted with the evidence, Warren didn't deny it, simply said, "You finally found it." Lauren asked, "Why them?" Warren tilted his head. "Because they were loved. That's what makes them worth remembering." She stepped back, stunned. Warren smiled faintly. Monsters don't care who they hurt, but artists they choose their canvas. The revelation destroyed whatever remained of Warren's public mask. The press dubbed him the Quiet Architect. Families of the other Redgate victims demanded fresh investigations. Forensics teams reopened cold cases stretching back to 1990, and Jacob, though vindicated, found a little comfort. He stood beneath the pecan tree again one evening in fall. A wind stirred the dried grass. The memorial plaque glinted in the dusk. Lauren joined him silently. "He did this for attention," Jacob said. "We gave it to him." "No," Lauren said. "We gave it to them, finally." Jacob nodded slowly, but his heart still felt hollow. The Avalili Nora Foundation shifted focus. Now they worked with law enforcement to map abandoned infrastructure nationwide, old processing plants, juvenile facilities, train depots, cannery, freezers, forgotten Silozini structure that could have become a grave. Jacob traveled to D.C. to speak at a congressional hearing on missing children. His voice cracked when he described the tank, the chains, the ledger, but he kept going. "We have to stop treating missing children as isolated tragedies," he said. "The places we abandon become places predators use," and the room fell. Silent, one final twist came a month later. A maintenance record surfaced from a cement plant Warren worked at in 1992. It contained a shipment log, 3 industrial barrels. Destination marked only as private use, WH. The plant was never investigated. Jacob made the call. They excavated the far storage lot and found 2 of the barrels. One was empty, the other still sealed. What it held wasn't publicly disclosed, but Jacob never forgot the day he stood over it and the official who whispered, "We think it predates everything." Jacob Carter stood at the base of the old pecan tree, where the memorial now bore 3 small brass hearts, one for Ava, one for Lily, and one for Nora. It had taken 10 years to get here, 10 years of silence, false hope, and buried grief. 10 years of wondering if he'd ever know what happened to his sisters, or worse, if he didn't want to know. But now he knew, and somehow that made it harder. The final burial took place on a cool spring morning. A private service, no media, just family, a few close neighbors, and the team who had helped find the truth. The caskets were small to Smallland. Draped in white, Lauren gave a eulogy. It wasn't poetic. It was simple. They were loved, she said. They were missed, and now they're remembered not as a headline, not as a case file, but as 3 little girls who mattered. After the service, Jacob walked alone through the field behind his grandmother's house, the same field where Ava once tripped over a sprinkler and burst into giggles, where Lily insisted the clouds looked like castles, where Nora used to sing, "To the sunflowers." Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. The Ava Lily Nora Foundation grew beyond what Jacob ever imagined. It began with a small mission documenting abandoned industrial sites, but soon expanded. They created the first national database of unregulated, defunct properties across rural America, and within a year, the foundation had flagged 74 locations previously never inspected. At one site in Nebraska, they found children's shoes behind a crumbled wall. At another in Arizona, a tunnel no one remembered, containing stained sheets and locks. Jacob attended every inspection he could, not as an investigator, not as a victim, but as a brother. The FBI quietly reopened multiple dormant cases linked to Warren Harov. They no longer saw him as a disturbed assistant. They saw him as a methodical predator, one who used decay and neglect as cover. The agency issued new guidelines on industrial site access, urging local governments to secure or demolish hazardous locations. What happened in Texas would not be forgotten, would be studied. And then one last letter arrived, not from a lawyer, not from law enforcement, but from an elderly man in Iowa who had worked at the same cement plant Warren had once serviced. He'd watched the news, heard the stories, and wrote, "Back in 1991, we sealed a barrel for Warren. He said it was old gear, but the weight was wrong. He paid cash, said no questions. For years I wondered, but I never spoke until now. That testimony led to the recovery of a third barrel. Inside were items from a girl missing since 1989. Her family had waited 30 years. Jacob made sure they were the first to be told. In the end, the case didn't become a Hollywood story, no movies. No true crime documentaries, no bestsellers, because Jacob declined them all, said this was never about a monster. It was about memory. What happened in that water tank, what happened to Ava, Lily, and Nora would never be undone. But maybe, just maybe, it could be understood. And maybe, because of them, others wouldn't be forgotten. As Jacob walked back from the tree, the wind picked up. A leaf danced in the air, catching the sunlight just so. He smiled faintly, painfully, honestly, said their names aloud, not as ghosts, but as sisters, forever 7, forever loved, forever.